Welcome to Real Talk and ELT, a podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English.
Hello, it's me again. Okay, so it's a pie in the eye kind of moment. I'm going to use the proper terminology because I didn't in the last podcast. So one of the previous podcasts that I did, I had a slip. I kept saying something because I did exactly what my students do. So let me just show you the thing that I messed up on. We'll just roll that for you.
When I'm working with clients and I look at the context in which they have to communicate, I look at the language community in which they're interacting.
Okay, and then also I had a bit of a hypocrisy moment. So I will also show you this because it's important for me to accept that I did this. So here's the hypocrisy that just happened.
You give somebody a speaking activity and they get so focused on just trying to complete the activity and communicate that they are just not paying attention to any of the language that they're using, and it comes out wrong. But you know that they know it. It's just that they're not paying attention because they're so focused on doing one thing.
And of course, now that the neighbor's dog is having a barking fit because something's going on in the street, or probably nothing, I can start the podcast because it's going to be noisy. So I misspoke, and I wanted to correct that because I think it's important to share the correct information with everybody. So it was a slip. I do know this. I want to say I'm going to give you the list of excuses. I do know this. Excuse number one, it was just a slip. Number two, I don't really, besides putting talking points down, I don't really plan or script out anything that I say on this podcast. Excuse number two. Number three, I hate listening to myself. I actually don't like going back and listening to myself. As long as I didn't say anything ridiculous, it's like kind of like, yeah, good enough. We'll post that. So I didn't catch it when I was editing and throwing all of the other stuff on. So that's excuse number 3 or 4. And also, I don't know what other excuses I can give you, but yes, I did make a miscategorization of something. I was using terminology that wasn't exactly accurate for the correct scenario. So let me give you accurate information. First, so we got to look at the difference between a speech community and a community of practice, because those are the two terms that I really should have used in the previous episode, and I didn't use them. So I did a little digging. Look at me. I got all prepared for this episode. So I did a little digging to get like really accurate information on them. And I have to say, the more that I dug into stuff, the more I was like, well, Okay, so let me just go through some of the things that I found with you, and then you can come to your own conclusions. I did misspeak, so I apologize. But let's dig into speech communities. So I went back and I found Del Hymes, which is back in the 70s, people. 74, 74. Oh, and William Labov, maybe? I'm not sure how to say it. I apologize. From 72. So I'll give you their definitions of what a speech community is. So Del Hymes stressed the fact that members of a speech community are unified by norms about uses of language. So here's his direct quote definition. A speech community is defined as a community sharing knowledge of rules for the conduct and interpretation of speech. Such sharing comprises knowledge of at least one form of speech and knowledge also of its patterns of use. This is from 1974. And he goes on to say, a person, he writes in first person too, so when I say I, this is not me, this is directly quoting him. A person who is a member of a speech community knows not only a language, but also what to say. Sharing of grammatical knowledge of form of speech is not sufficient. There may be persons whose English I could grammatically identify, but whose message escapes me. I may be ignorant to what I may be ignorant to what counts as a coherent sequence, request, statement requiring an answer, situation requiring a greeting, requisite, or forbidden topic. So this is what he said back in 74. So it's not only the forms, like grammatical forms, because you can be able to define identify grammatical forms, but it's kind of like the norms of how they use it. William Labov in 72 emphasized the social and evaluative forms shared by members in a speech community. So he said, again, direct quote from him, a speech community cannot be conceived as a group of speakers who all use the same forms. It is best defined as a group who shares the same norms in regard to language, who share a set of social attitudes towards a language. So in Labov's view, norms are revealed by the way that the members of the community kind of evaluate their own and others' speech. So it really goes to like, how do we use this? What's normal? Okay, everybody's kind of using it this way. Great, speech community. Okay. All right, so then let's move on to community of practice, because community of practice was introduced to language and gender research by, again with the names, sorry people, but Eckert and McConnell-Ginnett in 1992, and following that, Love and Wegner, or Wegner, I'm not sure, it might be German, in 1991 defined a community of practice. And let me give you the Love and Wegner 1991 definition of a community of practice. So, community of practice is as follows: an aggregate of people who come together around mutual engagement in an endeavor. So, slightly different than the speech community, right? Because they have like a purpose, a goal, an endeavor, something that they're working towards. Let me continue. Ways of doing things, ways of talking, beliefs, values, power relations, in short, practices, emerge in the course of this mutual endeavor. As a social construct, the community of practice is different from the traditional community, primarily because it is defined simultaneously by its membership and by the practice in which the that membership engages. This is from their 1992 publication. Sorry, the phone's going off, the dog's in the background. I apologize, but this is really good information. So this definition of the community of practice really suggests that the concept of that is this like rich, dynamic, it's super complex, and it really emphasizes the notion of practice. It's central to the understanding that it's different than what the traditional term of community, or in like sociolinguistic research, like the community was just kind of like practicing the same norms, right? So we had shared norms and evaluation of the norms, and that was kind of like you're in the community. But this community of practice is really these shared practices, and they have a very specific goal or endeavor or objective. So it's slightly different because it kind of encompasses a little bit more. So Wegner, I actually wanted to identify, I don't know if it's a he or she, I apologize, Wegner identified three crucial dimensions of a community of practice. So the first one is mutual engagement. So this really involves regular interaction, something that's different from a speech community. Can involve interaction, but there's a requirement for the community of practice. Two, a joint negotiation enterprise. A joint enterprise is not just stated a shared goal, but it's a negotiated enterprise. It involves complex relationships, mutual accountability that becomes part of the practice of the community. So it's much more complex than just saying like, okay, this is our objective. And three, a shared repertoire of negotiable resources accumulated over time. This includes linguistic resources such as specialized terminology and linguistic routines, but also resources like pictures, regular meals, gestures that have become part of the community's practice. Again, so always going back to practice, like how are they using it? Like what exactly are they doing? And some characteristics of a community of practice, because I think what happened was, let me just sidebar here for a moment. I'm not going to go too off track because I don't want to slip up again. But let me just sidebar here for a second. I think what happened was in the 70s, they said, okay, this is a speech community. And they were trying to like suss that out and figure it out. And then what happened 20 years later was some researchers said, okay, well, let's actually define something as a community of practice. And a community of practice really focuses on shared practices. This membership is kind of internally constructed. So like, are you a member of this community because you're doing the practices and you're not just following the norms. Like we have this goal, they're more endeavor oriented. And it's kind of like this social process of learning, whereas speech communities were just kind of this acquisition of norms. Like, this is what we use, this is what we have. It really doesn't say anything between the relationships of the individuals in the group, their personal identities, or anything like that, where a community of practice does account for those things. So I think they are two different things. Community of practice probably isn't the newer and better definition. There does still exist speech communities, but communities of practice it's like a more encompassing, complex look at how people are interacting with each other and what they're doing and what that means linguistically speaking. Okay, back to my definitions. So some characteristics of community of practice that are instantiated through a number of features, right? So these are kind of concreted down based on several different things. Like we mentioned before, sustained mutual relationships. They can be harmonious or it can be in conflict with each other. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're all working as a community. There might be some conflict. Shared ways of engaging in doing things. Let's see, the rapid flow of information and propagation of innovation. Absence of introductory preambles, as if conversations and interactions were merely the continuation of an ongoing process. Very quick setup of a problem to be discussed. Substantial overlap in participants' descriptions of who belongs. Knowing what others know, what they can do, and how they can contribute to an enterprise. Mutually defining identities, the ability to assess the appropriateness of actions and products. Specific tools, representations, and other artifacts. Local lore, shared stories, inside jokes, knowing laughter. Jargon and shortcuts to communication, as well as the ease of producing new ones. Certain styles recognized as displaying membership. And a shared discourse that reflects certain perspective of the world. So those are some key characteristics of a community of practice. Now, let me just go back and apologize again for saying language community. I don't know, I was in the flow and I was just using the wrong terminology, and I apologize. But hopefully this is kind of a clearer vision of what a speech community is and what a community of practice is. The reason that I wanted to introduce these ideas in the previous podcast, and maybe I didn't make it as clear as I probably should have, is that these are things that we need to take into consideration. So when we're doing our needs analysis, when we're looking at our students and what their either speech community of practice is, who they're interacting with, how they're interacting with those people, these are things that we should have some notion about or have some idea about, because it's going to influence the types of materials, the types of lessons, everything that we do, like integrating this in to our lessons, our syllabus, our curriculum, etc. So the message there was, I used the wrong terminology, totally slipped there, I apologize. I did know kind of the difference between speech community and community of practice, but actually I'm really glad that my friend messaged me and said, hey, you used the wrong term here. You might want to put, and I was like, ooh, okay, so let me go and investigate that. And I know that I used the wrong term, and no problem. But then I was like, what is the actual difference? Like, let's get down to brass tacks and see how we can kind of classify these things. So anyways, main objective is use this type of information. If you want to look into it, I would highly recommend it because it is quite interesting. For me, it's interesting. So looking at the differences between speech community and a community of practice, there also is this inherent idea of social identity theory, which is kind of like I'm going to say just kind of floating around in the area. I'm not going to speak much about it because I didn't really look into it as much as I should have to be able to kind of, give you some information about that. But sociolinguistically speaking, it's quite important. And then also it does have a serious impact on the way that we conduct ourselves, like in our actual teaching practice. So I would recommend, though, you don't have to go so in depth, but taking these things into consideration. So what is the community of practice that your students are engaged in? Do they belong to a speech community? What does that mean? And if they're kind of venturing into new speech communities or new communities of practice, what does that mean in terms of what do we need to introduce into the classroom? What skills do we need to build up? What linguistic features can we offer in our course of studies that will help them better navigate these kind of scenarios? So, first of all, I think that my list of excuses for saying the wrong thing was completely valid. 2, I do apologize for saying language community. It just came out. And 3, I hope that this was helpful and it actually kind of gave you a little bit of information to kind of reflect on and be like, okay, so what are they engaged in? And hopefully you'll integrate some of that reflection into your needs analysis, into your courses, into finding out how people are really communicating in the real world. And hopefully your teaching practice gets better and better and more thoughtful. And that's something that I should be doing, being more thoughtful about the terminology that I'm using. Again, I apologize, but hopefully this episode has been helpful and has cleared things up. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm not going to speak any more about it. And I hope that I'm forgiven. I will see everybody soon and have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. Want to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube or Spotify channel to stay up to date. And of course, take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.